Also, other happenings now. Last week, Moody's Investors Service changed the outlook on the Nigerian government of Nigeria to stable from negative and affirmed its long-term issuer and senior unsecured ratings at B2. What factors did Moody's consider, and what does this mean for the country? Well, we have Omotola Abimbola, investment analyst with Chapel Hill, and I'm joining us to discuss this. Good morning, Omotola. I trust you had a restful weekend. So help us to understand how and why at a time when it seems the economy is receiving blows from inflation, not just in Nigeria, but, the world over, and a drop in oil prices, drop in production of oil, and yet Nigeria is having a change in its rating to stable. Tell us, from your perspective, what led to this and what this means for the Nigerian economy. Omotola, I think you're muted. If you unmute yourself. Okay, I think we'll just give Omotola a little bit of time to. Okay. Omotola, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. So help us to understand how and what it means for Nigeria. At a time when it seems we have a blow of inflation, we have oil prices dwindling because of Omicron, among others, and then there's the drop in production of oil prices in Nigeria, and yet you're receiving a stable outlook from Moody's. What does it mean, and how did we get this stable rating?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. Well, there's this very old adage, that's very common in finance. Credit rating agencies, they are typically lagging of market movements, and this presents, outlook change by Moody's, demonstrates that in a very, very clear and concise way. Because what they are doing currently is probably what should have been done initially. Because over the past 1 year, since the last time that Moody's had, a ratings action on Nigeria, we have seen an improvement in the macroeconomy, particularly, looking at oil prices, which is a very major anchor of Nigeria's economy. Since we had, the COVID pandemic, come into place in early 2020, we have seen oil prices rebound very strongly, and now even to a very large extent, trading very close to or above the pre-pandemic level. And that improvement in oil prices has had a positive knock-on impact on other aspects of the economy, particularly the external account, that's the current account balance, which is now expected, to improve from a deficit of over 30% of GDP to less than 1% of GDP going forward. Also on the fiscal balance as well, in terms of improved revenue generation, by the federal government and other, states and local governments as well, and also on the economic growth, going forward. One other key thing that Moody's mentioned, in their recent notes is that, the impending opening of the Dangote refinery, perhaps, in the middle of next year, would also have a positive impact on the Nigerian economy over the medium term from the perspective of, improvement in export revenue, job creation, much more improved, current account balance, etc. So they expect all these factors to lead to an improvement in Nigeria's growth profile over the medium term. They're actually forecasting a growth rate of 3.5%, over the next 5 years, and that's perhaps, higher than what we had before the COVID-19 pandemic for 2%, although still much more lower than what we had before the 2015, 2014 oil price shock. So, I mean, all in all, it does appear as if, the near-term outlook for the economy is positive, based on an improvement, in oil production, and that's the major reason why Moody's elected to change its outlook for Nigeria to stable from negative. And thinking as to how this would impact, on the economy going forward. But like I said initially, rating agencies typically, lag the actual market movement. I strongly believe that if you look at the performance of Nigeria's sovereign euro bonds and even the corporate euro bonds, over the past 1 year, for instance, has already communicated that particular change the outlook for the economy. So in terms of the actual impact, in the short term, in the financial markets, it might be muted, but over the long term, if we see further improvement in the economy and much more stronger commitment to structural reforms, that would encourage Moody's to actually raise its credit rating from the current level of B2, perhaps to B1, and that's where we are going to see, a much more, bigger impact on the economy in terms of lower borrowing costs for the government, particularly in the international market, as well as for the corporates as well, because Nigerian corporates, more or less, their credit rating is constrained by the sovereign ceiling. So if the sovereign does not get the rating upgrade, many Nigerian corporates as well will not get the rating upgrade. So but I do believe that we will need to see further reform by the Nigerian government that will encourage Moody's to actually raise its credit rating from the current level.
Yeah, because I was going to ask if this is worth celebrating or if it is more like a base year effect. Because, I mean, these days, when 2020 is your base year, you don't really have a lot to celebrate. It just seems like you have a lot to celebrate. So from your perspective, should Nigerians be celebrating this change of the outlook, or is it just a base year effect?
I think it's too early yet, and like you said, it's also a function of base effect. And when you look at Nigeria's credit profile in terms of its rating, there's really not so much to celebrate for now. We are rated B2, which is several notches below investment grade, rating threshold of triple B minus, and we are only a single notch above a triple C credit rating. So in terms of the numbers itself, it does not reflect the capacity and the potential of this economy. So rather than celebrating for now, I think what we should probably be doing now is to encourage our policymakers to make very very urgent structural reforms, particularly on diversifying the revenue base of the country into more non-revenue potential, as well as trying to reduce the ratio of debt service cost to revenue ratio, and also make much more structural reforms that will lift the economic growth of this country, back to around 5 to 6% that we had before the oil price shock in 2014. So those are the actual steps that we need to make for us to have a much more positive credit rating that will lead to an improvement in the borrowing cost of the government as well as Nigerian corporates.
So, you mentioned some of the changes, positive changes that has come on board, in the last 1 year that has brought about revenue generation is improved, Dangote Refinery, and then one of them has also been the PIA, the Petroleum Industry Act. Has it made any contribution to this change in Nigeria's outlook?
Absolutely, it has. From the perspective of structural reforms, as well as demonstrating the government's commitment to raising oil production. One thing you would know is that if you follow Nigeria very closely, is that the oil and gas sector, to a very large extent, it has been weighed down heavily by uncertainty regarding the Petroleum Industry Act, which has led to very, very poor level of investment. And we are seeing the results of that today. Currently, Nigeria's oil production, it has averaged roughly, 1.7 million barrels per day this year, if you include condensate. That is much more lower than our potential, of at least 2.2 million barrels per day. And also, if you look at the trend of oil production in Nigeria for the past 30 years, we have essentially stagnated because we have not managed, to go above the peak of 2.4 million barrels per day that we achieved, sometime, about 10, 16 years ago. So oil production has been a challenge, because we've not managed to clear the uncertainty, regarding oil and gas investment. But with the Petroleum Industry Act, that will reduce the level of uncertainty in the oil and gas sector and will foster more investment that will raise production level. It has also included, much more better fiscal terms for high seas and other, indigenous and independent oil and gas companies looking to explore in the country. The host community, segments of the heart, which will ensure, effective contribution of oil and gas companies to the development of their host community. We also ensure, much more harmonious relationship between the oil producing companies and the community. So the PIK, it has set what I would call, like a very, very important standard or state that will foster improved investment in the oil and gas sector. And when the oil and gas sector is doing very well in terms of production, no doubt there'll be a positive knock-on impact on the economy as well. And beyond just speaking about the oil and gas production as well, one of the key things that the PIA also addresses is the issue regarding petroleum subsidy. Year to date, the Federation has spent more than a trillion naira on funding petrol subsidy, which is, close to 0.3, 0.4% of GDP. Last year the government spent less than 2 trillion naira on capital expenditure. So we are spending roughly, half of what we spend on capital expenditure just on one component of, of expenses, which is subsidy. So the PIA has already set a framework, for us to have, a gradual removal of fuel subsidy. And we have seen authorities over the past couple of weeks, come out to make a commitment that by next year, when they begin the full implementation of the PIA, perhaps we're going to have petrol subsidy being phased out gradually. So no doubt the passage of the PIA and many of the accompanying, regulation that has come to bear with the PIA contributed, to Moody's decision to change the outlook of the country from negative to stable. But for us to have, also to move above this, also need to see, very strong level of implementation by the government over the short to medium term.
Okay, well, when you talk about subsidy, that seems like an unsettled matter at this time because we have a lot of dissenting voices. But Moody's also expects Nigeria's fiscal deficit to narrow very slowly with ongoing efforts to increase non-oil government revenue. Would you say that the government is as intentional as they should be in boosting, revenue from the non-oil sector?
I think we've seen some baby steps already in terms of diversifying revenue away from oil, and we are seeing the positive results of that already. Don't forget, in 2015, we saw the federal government actually fully implement the TSA policy, the Treasury Single Account Policy, and that singular action alone, it has led to an explosion or a massive improvement in the independence revenue of the federal government. That is the operating surpluses of the ministries, departments, and agencies of the government. So that improvement in independence revenue, it has helped to grow the non revenue of the government. Beyond that policy as well, we have seen an initiative which is called the finance bill that is being forwarded to the National Assembly every year to follow the national budget. And with the introduction of the Finance Act, we have seen a constant fine tuning of our tax laws, to reduce the loopholes, to improve transparency, to bring about more clarity, and to lead to an improvement in revenue generation. And we have seen the positive impact of that as well. Don't forget, we had, the VAT rate that was increased, about 2 years ago from 5% to 7.5% through the finance bill. And today, we have the VAT, VAT revenue of the government growing by more than 20% annually. Same thing if you look at the customs revenue, if you look at, company income taxes as well, they are all growing at double digits annually. And if you look at the share or the contribution of non-revenue revenue, today we now have non-revenue contributing more to federal government's revenue than oil revenue. So that's the transformation. But I don't think we should stop there because we actually have a long ways to go.
Yeah.
If you look at other fiscal metrics, they are very, very poor. Although our debt to GDP ratio looks very low at 35% compared to our peers, By the time you look at, our level of debt compared to revenue, it's
All
quite
right.
significant at more than 400%.
All
And
right,
also the debt
Omotola.
service revenue.
All right, Omotola, thank you so much. Obviously, when we talk about boosting revenue from the non-oil sector, it's a long conversation that we'll continue to have in Nigeria until we see the full fruits of it. Thank you so much for being a part of the show this morning, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
So we'll take a break now. After the break, we'll be looking at Nigeria's financial landscape through the eyes of Financial Institutions Training Center, FITC. You stay with us. It's Business Morning on Channels Television.